cautious. So, for the next 24 weeks or so, depending upon what happens with Pentecost and Easter, we have decided that the four of us are going to preach through the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. So there's 4 Gospels, and one of them is Luke. I encourage you to take the time to read through Luke's Gospel as we do this, because this could be interactive if you all would let it be. You know, we all have these Bibles that are sitting in the pew in front of us, and I would invite you to turn over to the first chapter of Luke right now. You can follow along as I read this part of this chapter, and you will find it on page 1019, first chapter of Luke, if you want to follow along on that Bible. So, especially be reading Luke chapter 2 next week, because Jim's going to be preaching on Luke chapter 2. Now, we've spent a lot of time in Luke chapter 1 and 2 over the Christmas, but I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the Gospel of Luke as we begin this process. It is different than the rest of the Gospels. If you read it, you'll see that. It's called the loveliest gospel, or the most beautiful gospel. And it gives us a very clear picture of Jesus as a man, compassionate, loving throughout his earthly ministry. It brings to light very personal things about Jesus and his family that the other 3 Gospels do not have. For instance, nowhere else do we hear of the events leading up to the birth of John the Baptist, which we'll discuss today. Nowhere else will you read of the angel Gabriel visiting Zacharias and Jesus' mother Mary. Luke alone records that Jesus was born in a stable and that angels appeared to shepherds outside of Bethlehem. He's the only one that tells us about Simeon and Anna when Jesus is taken to the temple to be dedicated. Luke alone includes what's called the Magnificat, Mary's song that she sings when Elizabeth greets her, when she goes to visit Elizabeth, or the Benedictus, which is Zechariah's song that he sings or says when his 9 months of being mute is ended, or what is called the Nunc Dimittis, which is Simeon's song when they bring the baby Jesus into the temple to dedicate him. And Luke's gospel contains other things, while it contains the teachings of the main part of Jesus' teachings, but it also includes several things that the others don't have. For example, 2 that I'll discuss today, and one which is very familiar to everyone, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Luke pays particular attention to the miracles of Jesus, especially those which deal with healing of sickness and disease, which makes sense because it tells us in Colossians 4:14 that Luke was a physician. This gospel has always been attributed to Luke. The title which accompanied it is According to Luke. Now, it's been interesting that in the rest of the New Testament, there are sometimes disputes over who actually wrote them, but not Luke, because Luke wasn't a big guy. He wasn't an apostle. He wasn't a guy that followed Jesus around and was well known, and like James and John and Peter. He wasn't like that. He was an unknown commodity. And so by giving a gospel according to Luke, it makes sense because nobody's going to argue about it. It's never come into question as far as I know. Luke says in chapter 1, verse 2, that he consulted with eyewitnesses of Jesus, which includes obviously Jesus' mother, because nobody could tell the things that are in Luke 1 and 2 without having spoken to Mary, because they are very, very personal. Now, Luke is not mentioned much in the Bible. And one of them is in 2 Timothy 4:11, one of Paul's last letters, where he writes at the end of his life, "Only Luke is with me." And there's some other things about Luke that are interesting. Luke was a Gentile. He's the only one of the gospel writers that was not a Jew. He is the only Gentile, as far as we know, whose writings are included in the New Testament. And Luke not only wrote the gospel that bears his name, but he also wrote the book of Acts. And if you look at the sheer volume of the things that were written in Luke and in Acts, that's a big slice of the New Testament. And he was a Greek because you can tell, according to the scholars, since I'm not a Greek scholar, I can't tell you this, they said, but Luke has very proper Greek. Whereas the apostles spoke a different form of Greek. Luke was a traveling companion of Paul. He joined him on his second missionary journey, as is recorded in Acts chapter 16, verses 8 through 10. And some postulate that Luke wrote his gospel while Paul was imprisoned at Caesarea, because it says that his companions could come and go while he was in prison. Now remember, Paul was just being held. He wasn't convicted of anything at that time. And that's part of the reason that we have in our laws that what they call laws against unlawful detainer. You have to be charged. We have speedy trial rules, and you have to be tried within a specific period of time, particularly if you're incarcerated, because it's unjust. Part of that arises out of this New Testament situation with Paul. Like Matthew, Luke traces Jesus' genealogy, but he doesn't go merely back to Abraham like Matthew does. He goes all the way back to Adam. In other words, he goes back to our first parents, because the gospel's not just for the descendants of Abraham, but it's for all people. And Luke, being a Gentile convert, wanted that message taught. Now, Luke begins his gospel, as we'll read in a moment, addressing it to most excellent Theophilus. Some people believe that Luke used this greeting to disguise it, that it was to be a circular gospel. Whereas the most obvious thing is when he says the most excellent Theophilus, that he's actually addressing a person. And when he says, His Excellency, or your most excellent Theophilus, it's likely that this was a Roman official or someone of rank that Luke was writing about, or to, and that had come to believe in Jesus Christ, and Luke was sending this to him to help him in his faith. Now, Theophilus does mean lover of God. So, if you are a lover of God, or if you're interested in knowing about God, Luke has written this to you. One thing I think that you will see over these next 24 or so weeks, and by the way, I'm not going to get to everything that's in Luke chapter 1. I'm only going to take a slice of it, and I have a feeling that that's the way the other fellows will take it when they handle it, because if we didn't do it that way, we'd probably be about 3 years in the Gospel of Luke, because there's a lot in here. But one thing that I want to underscore today, in which I think you will see, is that Luke's gospel is a lot about prayer. Luke shows us Jesus at every important occasion of his life in prayer. Before his baptism, before his first conflict with the Pharisees, before he chose the 12 apostles, before he questioned the disciples of who they thought he was, and he gave them the first prediction of his death. It shows him in prayer at the transfiguration. It shows him in prayer on the cross. Only Luke tells us that Jesus prayed for Peter in his hour of testing. And another thing that's unique about Luke is that he refers to Jesus as the Son of Man, underscoring the humanity of Jesus to his audience. You recall a couple of weeks ago I preached on the issue of, was Jesus God or was Jesus man? And to the Greek minds at the time, it was impossible for a God to take on flesh because flesh is corrupted. But Luke wants to make the point, and very clearly, that Jesus was a man, that he walked in the flesh, that he was a real person, that he was born as a baby, and that he grew up just like we did. And so you will see many times Luke addresses the issue of prayer. And so now if you want to turn over there to page 1019, I think it is, you'll read along with me, where we read these words. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out to you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the exact truth about the things you have been taught. I'll just digress here. Luke is so detailed in these next couple of verses that it's absolutely impossible to miss that this is historically accurate. Over the years, critics have said, oh, these people didn't exist. These people didn't exist. But what has happened is that as more advanced techniques of archaeology have been employed in the Holy Land, all of these people have been identified and can be placed in history at a particular point in time. It is interesting to note that if I know 6 things about you, I can find out a lot about you. Because there is nobody else, even if your name is John Smith, that if I have 6 established facts about you, that I cannot find out who you are. So he says, in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, there was a priest named Zacharias, the division of Abiah, who had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. Now it happened that while he was performing his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division, according to the custom of the priestly office, he was chosen by Lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. And an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right of the altar of incense. Zacharias was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and he will drink no wine or liquor, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while yet in his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. It is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and the power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Zechariah said to the angel, how will I know this for certain? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. The angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you shall be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their proper time. The people were waiting for Zacharias and were wondering at his delay in the temple. But when he came out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple. And he kept making signs to them and remained mute. And when the days of his priestly service were ended, he went back home. And after these days, Elizabeth, his wife, became pregnant. And she kept herself in seclusion for 5 months, saying, "This is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace from among men." What a vivid story this is. We find Zacharias, who was a priest in the temple. Now, during the days of King David, they had divided the priests up into 24 divisions. And each division would take turns serving in the temple. And the duties that the priests would undertake during their division service were determined by casting lots. So Zacharias is in the holy place because a lot fell to him to burn the incense. He's in the holy place before the golden altar of incense. And there he burns the incense and he offers up prayers for the people, the nation, and those who are gathered outside. And they're expecting him to come out when he's done with this and give a blessing to them. What is remarkable about this account is that as he prays, 400 years of silence is ended. No prophet has arisen in Israel for 400 years. And now the Lord brings an angel, Gabriel, to answer Zechariah's prayers and to give him good news. Have you ever waited a long time for the Lord to answer one of your prayers? I mean, I know you haven't waited 400 years. I have found that sometimes God allows me to go through times when I feel that he has forsaken me. I have not heard his voice. He has not spoken as far as I know. But I have found that as I continue my service, as I continue to walk in faith, that God does not leave me alone. And that is the point in this thing, in this account of the gospel, where the Lord answers Zacharias powerfully and does a great thing. Now, do we always get what we ask for? No. By definition, miracles are a rare occurrence. And a lot of times what we pray for is a miracle. Remember, also, is it such a bad thing that as we come to the Lord and we bring our petitions before him, that we're spending time with him, pouring out our hearts to him? Is this such a bad thing? I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. Speaking to the Lord, coming before him in prayer for ourselves or for others, is a very worthwhile activity. And just because we don't get exactly what we want, when we want it, the way we want it, God is not McDonald's. He's not Burger King. We can have it our way. Nicky Gumbel, the fellow who runs the Alpha course, says, when we find that we don't pray, nobody gets healed. However, we find that when we do pray, some people get healed. Sometimes the prayers we pray don't get answered, or they get answered no. And then other times, they get answered with a resounding yes. If we look at this passage a little bit closer, Gabriel says to him, "Don't be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth." He goes on to say, "And he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. It is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Now, if you go back even further to Isaiah's prophecies, 700 years before Jesus was born, the role of John the Baptist is foretold. This forerunner is predicted. It says he will prepare the way for Jehovah. And Gabriel tells Zacharias that John is that one. And as we see, in hindsight, John did prepare the way for Jesus. And if you look at the scriptures that are in Isaiah's prophecy, it's not a stretch to say that Jesus then, if he fulfilled that prophecy, was God in the flesh. And it's interesting that after that, there is no other prophecy of a forerunner coming in the spirit and the power of Elijah. And while the Jews mention him at Passover, there's not much that they have to talk about concerning Elijah. Now, this is the thing that I find amazing. Zacharias' prayer is answered. And he has immediate amnesia. He misses the importance of what is happening. A 400-year silence has been ended. An angel of the Lord has appeared to him. He has been told that his prayers to have a child are going to be answered. And the fact that he's advanced in years is no big deal, because the Jews talk about Abraham and Sarah. So does he say, "Oh boy, thank you, Gabriel, tell me more about this. This is really cool. Woohoo, woohoo." No. He doesn't get it. Right over his head. I mean, after all, it had been 400 years of silence since a revelation or a visitation. The northern kingdom had been taken away into captivity and relocated. The southern kingdom had been taken into the Babylonian captivity. And the Jews had prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, and God didn't seem to care. He didn't seem to answer. The silence was real, and I guess you could say it was easy to give up hope. I wonder if you've ever prayed for something and then when God answered, you didn't even recognize it. Sometimes God answers not the way that we prayed for, but the way that he wants. And he answered us, and right over our heads it goes, because we were looking for A, and he gave us C. And if we were to stop and we were to accept C and cherish it and walk in it, we'd realize that C is better than A. Jesus admonishes us not to give up. Later in his gospel, Luke records in chapter 18, verses 1 through 8, the parable of the, what they call, importunate widow. And he told them that parable to show them that at all times they ought to pray and not lose heart. In this parable, Jesus tells his followers, that is you and me, that we should not lose heart. Not lose heart when we don't get what we ask for immediately. Not lose heart when it seems like the Lord is not giving any answer. because the Lord may well be answering our prayers whether or not we see it. Maybe you're single and you want to get married. Maybe you're childless and you want to have children. Maybe you need healing. Maybe you need a place to live or you need a job. Beloved, don't give up on the Lord. Continue. Because just because there is silence doesn't mean that the Lord has not answered or will not answer us. There's another parable that Jesus says in chapter 11 of Luke's gospel. He said to them, suppose one of you has a friend and goes to him at midnight and says to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has come to me from a journey, and I have nothing to set before him. And from inside, he, that is a friend, answers and says, don't bother me. The door has already been shut, and my children and I are in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything. I tell you, he will not get up and give him anything because he is the friend, yet because of his persistence, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. So I say to you, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. In both of these parables, which Luke alone records, Jesus is emphasizing this lesson that Zechariah has to learn to pray and not lose heart. And we need to be careful to not lose heart when we pray. It is amazing to me that Zechariah says, how will I know this for certain? It's Gabriel. Zechariah was a priest. He had the book of Daniel. Gabriel's the angel that appeared to Daniel. I'm sure that Gabriel didn't just look like somebody off the street in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans with flip-flops. I'm sure he appeared in some glorious way to Zechariah because immediately Zechariah is afraid. He says, don't be afraid. Zechariah is afraid. This happens all the time when people have an encounter with God. They say stupid stuff. Like, for instance, the Transfiguration, which alone is recorded in Luke. There's Peter, and he says, let's build altars here to you and Elijah and to Moses. That's idolatry. That didn't fly. But Zechariah says, how can I know this for certain? Huh? Zechariah basically asked for a sign. And I think it's really funny that this angel was the sign. This visitation was the sign. This prediction that John was going to go on in the spirit and power of Elijah to prepare the way of the Messiah that had been promised, that the Jews had been looking for, that was a sign. So you know what the angel does? He says, you want a sign? I'll give you a sign. You're not going to be able to talk. More silence. You don't believe the silence is broken? You're going to be silent. So don't take what I mean today that God cannot say no to our prayers, because sometimes no is the best answer. But Jesus has encouraged us to pray and to not give up, so we are not wrong when we continue to pray for what we believe is God's will for our lives or for another person, even when we don't see him give the answer in just the way that we'd requested it. So, now I would like you to do something if you're comfortable to do it. And if not, you don't have to. I would like you to get up or to turn to someone close by you and take a few minutes. If you're online and you are watching with someone at home, turn to the person you're with or persons. And if you, obviously people online know themselves, but if you don't know the person, introduce yourself. If you want to get up and go and talk to them, that's okay. And just share a few brief things about yourself. And then I want you to share with them one thing that you would like them to pray with you about, and why you believe it is the right thing for the Lord to answer this prayer request. And I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to do that, and I'm going to be quiet. So I want you to pray with and for one another. I want another person to know that thing for which you are praying. And I want you to have some accountability there, so that Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there I'll be. And where 2 or 3 agree as touching anything in heaven and earth, he will do it. So